Next, we're going to bring up our next, and then I believe this is our final session, is AI in Cities, Balancing Progress and Responsibility. Our next two speakers will be joining us virtually today and will be sharing their perspectives on how cities can begin to explore the use of AI policies they should consider putting in place to ensure its responsible use. As time permits, we'll take questions after both of them speak. Our first speaker, or actually one of our speakers, is Peter Pirnejad. He's the city manager for the town of Los Altos Hills. When we were preparing for this thing, I had to let the cat out of the bag. Dr. Pete and I go back way to the bad streets of Silicon Valley, doing some great stuff and doing things and everything. And our other speaker is Christopher Jordan, who is a senior specialist on urban innovation at the National League of Cities. Christopher, thank you for joining us, and please take it away.
Great, thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you virtually. I'm joining from Washington, D.C., where I'm sure it's much colder and grayer out than where you're at, so I'm jealous. But so as mentioned, I'm at the National League of Cities. I'm on the urban innovation team. So what we do within NLC is we are focused on investigating emerging technologies. So AI, of course, is our big focus at the moment. And we do that in order to help cities modernize government operations and improve their public service delivery. So I'm really glad to join you all. It sounds like you've been having some great discussions today, hosted by the South Bay Council of Governments. And I'm glad that we can finish this conversation with a well-rounded sort of look at the ethics and responsible use by local governments, by cities and towns and villages, to really harness the power of AI for good. And, you know, you heard from Congressman Ted Lieu about the sort of national security and, you know, those kinds of considerations with AI. But with cities, you know, I think really leaning into the focus of the use cases and looking at how this is really kind of a multiplier effect, unlike any technology that we've kind of really seen. You can kind of compare it to things like the internet or the electronic spreadsheet in terms of the kind of efficiency boosts. But this really is, I think, the hype around this is so real, and for good reason. So what I am going to do is share with you at NLC what we're seeing at the national level in terms of how cities are kind of getting in front of AI, how they're seeking to understand it, but also the guidelines they're putting in place in order to make sure that staff are using this responsibly. And so that they aren't sort of, you know, using it by accidentally, not necessarily maliciously, intentionally, but even, you know, unintentionally using AI, generative AI in particular, to cause harm. So I'm going to share my screen here, give you a look at the research that our innovation team at NLC has been doing. Great. So Peter, maybe you can give me a thumbs up if you can see this. Great.
Yep, sure can.
Perfect. So these cities here were sort of early adopters in the space of putting out responses. You know, cities are no stranger to using AI, particularly for things like risk assessments and sort of on the predictive side within city operations. But when generative AI hit, you know, really with the release of ChatGPT in November 2022, this really forced many cities to take a response in considering how they were going to approach it, because all of a sudden you had this rise in public awareness of what generative AI means, what large language models are, the kinds of data that these models are being trained on and they run on. So cities really took a wide range of responses. You had cities like Boston on the East Coast that took a kind of a more soft-handed wait-and-see approach. They put out what they called responsible experimentation guidelines. I think sometimes with the AI conversation, there's this dichotomy between, you know, do we regulate or do we let folks innovate? And I think with cities, you know, that's more or less perhaps a false dichotomy. There is grounds to create responsible experimentation like the city of Boston did. So what they did is they put out sort of a document to show some examples of how staff can use AI, things like prompts to write memos or for correspondence or for translating content into multiple languages, making content more accessible for users, particularly online content. And they did put out sort of a list of absolute no-nos, right? Like the things you should never do with generative AI platforms, like sharing sensitive data or, just copying, pasting it without any kind of human stopgate or human in the loop consideration. The CIO from Boston has a quote I like where he compares AI with any other tool like spell check. Ultimately the accountability remains on the end user. So AI isn't just going to automate everything. We can use it more as a co-pilot or sort of a responsible sort of efficiency boosting tool rather than something that's just going to do our jobs for us. Other cities have taken more heavy-handed approaches. So Seattle has codified a policy. San Jose, after some interim guidelines, I think just a couple nights ago, passed some codified policy. In the case of Seattle, they have established oversight committees. They are continually assessing through their procurement system, all their generative AI models that are in use by the city. Because the thing about these models, as you may have learned today, is they're always changing. It's not as simple as assessing these one time upfront. It really does take a continuous look to see how the models are changing and also how the use cases are developing as well. It seems like every other week, city governments are finding new creative ways to use these platforms, which is exciting. But also there's, just a lot of mystery of what could potentially become out of this. AI is like a neutral use technology, much like electricity. It can be used for good, it can be used for good or bad. But we still just don't know exactly where this thing is headed. So it's good to keep track of these things, to build out sort of public registers of the use cases that your city is your city has experimented with or put into practice, while also making sure that the models themselves are serving you well, that they aren't going to hallucinate and be something that can cause a lot of strife between you and your residents and your community relations. One other city I wanted to point out is Chattanooga, Tennessee. I want to point them out because they had a strong reaction of putting a moratorium in place at first on generative AI. And they walked that back, and they went back to the table with their CTO and their CIO, and they really began developing a multi-stakeholder approach to see, rather than just ban this outright, how can we go back and talk to our city employees about the ways that they were using it, the ways they want to use it, and kind of making a more bespoke or sort of like department-specific policies, working with staff to see what they really need out of a generative AI tool. Pro licenses for these platforms can be pretty expensive if you're going to disperse them all throughout City Hall to your staff. So they're working through these questions about what's necessary and how they can best support the needs of staff. So I'm going to go to my next slide here to show you. So this is a whole range of AI governance mechanisms that we have seen throughout the country. Sorry, Peter, can you see this again? I think
Yeah, I can still see it.
There we go. Okay, let me try this again here.
The crowd seeing it?
Sorry, I never actually started my presentation, so this helps. So anyway, so this is after reading through all of these plans across the country that cities have put out. These are the areas that they're kind of working around these principles: transparency and accountability, privacy, security, fairness, equity, awareness, and education. No city's doing all of these things. I'm putting this out as sort of a recommendation to your communities to consider which of these might be best fits for you and your staff. To really think through the principles of AI that you would like to see embedded throughout your city hall, and then to work through, okay, we want AI to be fair or equitable, and then to think about the tool and the mechanism that corresponds with that goal. So there's a lot of exciting stuff out there. San Jose, California has been a leader, not just internally with their city, but also nationally, even internationally, with their GovAI coalition. They're working with about 200 agencies, most of them cities, and they're putting out really, really good resources to help cities interact with vendors and to assess and audit AI systems. So I recommend looking at that. And I'm mentioning them because I want to share just two of the tools that I've found useful that they're putting out when I'm talking with cities and local governments about AI. I always talk about this AI review framework. So again, this is sort of in their procurement process where they've established a process for looking at AI tools through AI fact sheets that vendors have to fill out to show their transparency, to show that they're going to be accountable. And then on the city side, they're going to fill out an impact assessment form. So again, think about this sort of a model, how it might work in your community, where in your process can you fit AI into something that looks already at risk and data privacy, or building a new process that looks at AI in particular. And the last thing I want to share, also from the city of San Jose, just as an example of sort of how you might evaluate or calculate risk of generative AI, or AI in general, really. So in this, they've kind of looked at the risk of an information breach, so like a cybersecurity hack, or perhaps even just one of these large language models, like having this information from the city and maybe giving it out to other people inadvertently. And on that x-axis, you have risk of adverse impact. So they've been able to kind of calculate and score just in 3 broad categories, different use cases, from those that are less risky to those that are actually prohibited. So again, something to consider as you think through existing use cases, as you work with your city employees to identify how they're using it, and then going back and asking, in what ways should we let them experiment, and what ways should we try to curb the experimentation to be a bit more responsible. So with that, I'm really happy to hand it off to Peter, who's going to walk through more of an on-the-ground look at how his city, Los Altos Hills, has been able to actually create policy and work from this from the beginning. So Peter, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, thanks for having us. I know it's late in the day and everybody's probably getting a little tired, but always happy to help share some of the learnings that we've had. Just looking at some of the cities that Chris showed, I mean, these are larger cities, right? 700,000, 600,000, the smallest of which is probably in the 100,000+. We're talking cities of our size are anywhere around 30,000, or in my case, it's even less than 10,000. There's still room to do a generative AI approach to local government, and there's a huge benefit. So I'm here to kind of walk you through how do you actually put in practice some of these generative AI tools, and a kind of a practical, hands-on, boots-on-the-ground approach to how you do it in a small to medium-sized city. So next slide. So I kind of, as I thought through today's talk, thinking first of what I went through is first about education. So first you have to educate yourself. So I'm really encouraged by everybody in the crowd being here to actually learn. Just by a show of hands, how many of you are elected officials? Okay, and staff? Okay, and just common, general, interested public? Oh, okay. All right, great. So, so this addresses all 3. So the first thing that we need to think about when we're talking about generative AI is just take it slow, learn what you can. Don't believe everything you read. Go to multiple sources, do like you did in school, and really try to vet out everything you can possibly learn about this technology. It can seem overwhelming, but once you start getting into it, it starts to make sense. And if you go back in time, as our previous speaker said, and I can appreciate Mark's comments and about this being a computer or even a word processor or a calculator. In 15 years from now, people will look back at this and say, okay, this is the modern calculator, and everybody uses it and they don't think second thoughts about it. But first is we have to educate people. First, you educate yourself, and then you educate those around you. In my case, it was about educating my staff, my council, my commissions, my community. We did a variety of sessions specifically to the staff. So I brought on a consultant that helped actually educate my staff on what is generative AI and provided them a tour of actually how to use it. A lot of them had not used it before, especially the older ones. The younger ones had been dabbling with it, but everybody got something out of that education. It was a hands-on training. We actually started a leadership Santa Clara County academy that focused on generative AI, and they did a 7-month session on this, and they were non-experts. They weren't in the tech field. And then they presented to the city managers in Santa Clara County what they had learned, and I invited them to the training as well. So there is a very simple way to get started, learning how to do simple prompt engineering, as they call it, and how to get some basic inquiries put into a large language model like ChatGPT can be really beneficial. But first, it starts with educating. And then once we did the hands-on training, we had an informational session and updates to the city council. We shared some of what we had learned. We shared intentions on social media and our other media outlets. I do a weekly newsletter to my community and told them that we're looking into this technology. We intend to come forward with a use policy and take steps. And so everybody knew that we were looking into it and intended to move forward with some kind of actionable plan. So once we did that and started to educate the community, the staff, the council, we started to actually put something into motion. So next slide. So the first thing you need to do as a small community that you'd want to advocate to your cities and towns and counties is to develop an AI use policy. So we saw the ones, NLC has a great template. San Jose has been working on theirs, and as Chris mentioned, just took it and had it approved. There's other cities, but as I mentioned, those are larger cities. So we actually created one in Los Altos Hills. It's about 7 pages. It's very simple, easy to read, easy to understand, lays out the basic elements. We'll pivot, we'll amend if we need to in the future. But essentially, it puts a basic framework on how staff can use it and how the community can expect us to use it. We developed that policy in collaboration with a technology committee, which is members of the community appointed by the council. And we addressed concerns. We took questions. We talked through everything from, can you trust AI? What do you do with hallucinations? Data poisoning, which is a concept that if enough people put bad data in the internet and you source that data, what would you do with it? Would it change the results of the search? And we made sure that we didn't make the policy too onerous. We didn't try to cover everything. We covered the high points. And then we brought it to council and they adopted it. And I would say less is more when it comes to this policy. You're going to have to revisit and pivot in the future. But for now, putting something in place so your staff feels comfortable using it, but they also know that it's not a free-for-all. So one of the things that we put in there was that we need to have an enterprise-grade version of a generative AI model. So like if you were to use ChatGPT, you buy an enterprise version of it so that you can have some controls over, the types of searches. But generally, just some rough parameters on how staff can use the technology. Next. The next was pilots. So there's a lot of different types of AI. It's like saying you're going to use a computer in the office. Well, that means a lot of things. There's a lot of different types of computers. AI tools can be used in a lot of different ways. So the easiest way, if you were thinking about like what would be a toe in the water, how would you want to start with the use of AI? The first thing you'd want to think about is something that uses your data, that uses a very confined set of data when it's creating a response. An example of that would be a chatbot that basically searches your website to the answers that it gives the community. What time is the library open? Okay, it can search your website, get that information, and respond. Where do I take my pet to get a license? Do I need a business license? Do I need a building permit to install a new kitchen? You know, things like that. It's going to your website and you're defining the answers, and it will provide the answers to the person asking that. This could be a huge time savings for you and to your community, trying to get questions rather than calling your staff. Chatbots have been widely used, and they're very popular, easy to control, easy to configure. A lot of great companies. CityBot is one of those that can easily be used to whip up a simple chatbot in your community and start to get immediate results. Another one, which is really starting to gain momentum, is meeting minutes. Every city has to create meeting minutes for all the different committees, commissions, council, planning commission. There's a solution right now that you just feed the video into the large language model, and it gives you annotated minutes, or you can make it action minutes. There's versions of that plug into your Zoom as like a third-party plugin. So there's a solution right now called Hamlet that allows you to create meeting minutes in the format that they have provided that can eventually supplement or even replace your own meeting minutes. It's a really handy tool, but again, dealing with a control set of data. The next step, I would say, would be using AI for known data. So for example, if you were to monitor social media, this is an established set of data. You know it's coming in through your city. It's on channels that you're aware of. Say if you have a Facebook page and that Facebook page allows people to leave comments, it's scraping that data and doing what's called sentiment analysis. So if you've heard of Zen City, they're a great example of this, where they actually look at data in your community and see how negative are they on a proposition or on a ballot measure or on a topic. And then you can see what the chatter is all about and whether it's predominantly positive or negative. So using AI in that situation, you're using a defined set of information. It's not owned by you, but at least you know what it is. And you can essentially look at it a little closer before you release it for public consumption. So that would be using AI in that sense. There's also examples of that if you were to use AI for just monitoring emails, and you can ask questions based on email monitoring. Another example, kind of going down that spectrum, would be AI that's used for data for limited purposes on the open internet. This is the area I would say be most careful with. So let's say that you wanted to create a job description, and you say, okay, the prompt would look something like, I'm an HR professional working in a small Southern California city. I need to create a job description for a finance manager, create a job description in 1,000 words or less that ensures that they are able to, balance the budget, do month-end reports, do a yearly audit, and monitor payroll. And it would create that job description for you. So something like that, where it's a very defined set of a defined ask, but it's going to the internet for that information. So that you need to vet very carefully. You're looking for hallucinations. You're looking for things that don't make sense. You're looking to refine it so it reflects what you're looking for in your city, but there's definitely value in that. Write me an article about how to defend homes against residential burglaries. You ask a prompt like that and provide some context, it could give you a very great starting point to prepare an article or to put into the background section of a staff report. You don't want to copy and paste it, but it definitely gives you the bones, if you will, of what you might want to include. So it's great information for background, for research, for prompting. Think of it as the cure for writer's block. If you were to put in, start a staff report that analyzes the use of electric scooters in my city and what are the challenges and opportunities, it would be a great starting point. And then the final slide, we talk about pivots. So once you've done is that the last slide? No? Yeah, I've got one more. You want to think about what have you learned from those? experiences. So initiate a generative AI task force. Maybe this is members of a commission, a committee, your staff, people that get together on an unfrequent, unregular basis, maybe once a quarter or as needed, to just talk through what's learned, what are best practices, is there new training, is there things that some departments have done better than others or some cities have done better than others. Chris mentioned there's an AI task force being head out of San Jose that's been very helpful. So that's a great place to source information about where the innovation is headed and what you might learn from it. In some cases, you can read about situations that are a little bit precarious, like, in the example to a city that will remain unnamed, a certain manager created a record of an employee on a personnel issue and loaded the large language model with offenses that they had, and then asked the language model to prepare a disciplinary memo. Something like that, you wouldn't want to necessarily load that information into that large language model. You'd want to have a policy that might give you some parameters on what kind of information you get. So rather than upload all the offenses by name, I would suggest you just ask the large language model, what would you do in a situation where an employee did X? And it might give you some suggestions. Periodically review the feedback that you get from your staff on technology that they've implemented, solutions, as well as their use of prompt engineering. Share that learning with the committees and the community, and make sure that you have a dialogue with the council about what's going well and what you need to improve. But this is definitely early stages for all of us, so we're all learning as we go. But if you're not starting to experiment, I would highly encourage you to, or encourage your communities to experiment and really start seeing how this could benefit them. So with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Mark or Chris, and then we can open it up for Q&A.
Give Chris and Peter a hand. Now, if you have questions, we got time for about 2 questions, but you have to wait till the microphone gets to you, otherwise they won't hear you. So it looks like we have 1 question here. Microphone's coming. Again, I want to say thank you, Christopher. Thank you, Dr. Pete, for hanging out. Always good to see you all. It was great. So right here, put your hand up, please. Young lady with the white hat right there, she had a question. Oh, you were waving your hand, no? Oh, you were saying goodbye. Oh, okay. All right. That means it's time for us to go, I guess. So again, I want to thank you, Peter and Christopher, for sharing this knowledge with us. It's really important. And I think we impressed you guys because there's a lot of electeds, there's a lot of staff here, but there's a lot of community members here. This was something that we were hoping to make sure we educate all 16 of our communities and those adjacent to understand what this is, as it's going to impact our lives. So if we don't have any questions, then we'll let you guys go ahead and be dismissed and go do what you need. Oh, we'll get to the raffle. Do they need to be here for the raffle? Oh, wait, hold on. Where's 1 question? Okay. Hold on, wait for the microphone.
About the community engagement, I saw that generative AI task force reference there. Is that where community members can find information and organize themselves to hold their municipalities accountable for protecting their data?
Did you guys hear that question?
I did. So that AI task force is open to employees, actually staff. I don't know if they actually have a publicly available forum, but when I last talked to them, they said they were going to be releasing that data publicly soon. So I would check back on that website, and I can drop it in the chat, but I don't think anybody can see it. But Mark maybe can get a copy of that website to you, and you could definitely follow them. But as I said, it's being used as a resource for staff and elected officials at this time as they're collecting and sharing data.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, let's give it everybody another round for applause. Everybody kind of persevering through this today. Again, we want to thank you, Christopher and Peter. And as a technology professional myself, I want to thank the AV team and everything. You guys are awesome. and everything. Sometimes you're the unsung heroes and stuff just works. Nobody notices technology professionals until something doesn't work. And then now we become the center of attention. But hopefully you enjoyed the feast that we put before you today in regards to this new knowledge and everything. Our intent as the COG was to make sure that we did something impactful on a topic that was very new, but again, as I stated earlier, that's going to really have a major impact on all of our lives.